What's up, everyone? So today I'm going to talk about serotonin overdose and serotonin imbalance, but specifically hyperactivity of the serotonin receptors. So what do I mean by serotonin overdose? Essentially, first of all, you need to understand that serotonin is an antagonist of dopamine and vice versa. If you have high dopamine, you'll have low serotonin. If you have high serotonin, you'll have low dopamine. So typically, when people consume large amounts of serotonin promoting substances such as SSRIs, certain antidepressants, antipsychotics, and also natural herbs like St. John's wort, rhodiola, 5-HTP, tryptophan. And also, what I've noticed is coming off of stimulants like caffeine or yohimbe, since caffeine and yohimbe tend to spike neurotransmitters, especially dopamine, for long periods of time. When you come off of them, you're going to hit a low. And that low, those withdrawal symptoms, well, the low feeling at least, is usually caused by, your low dopamine, okay? Because addiction to caffeine or consistent usage of caffeine spikes your dopamine. And when you come off, you're going to be depleted of dopamine because all this time you've been consuming caffeine to spike your dopamine. And now since you're off of caffeine, your dopamine is not able to naturally be stimulated. And you might even be deficient in dopamine, in which case you should take L-tyrosine in the morning on an empty stomach, or mucuna prurens and ginkgo biloba. So anyway, symptoms of serotonin overdose, and I'm not talking like if you do crazy drugs to simulate serotonin or super hardcore antipsychotics. Now, I will say, okay, I was on antipsychotic medication for a long period of time, from the time I was like 9 years old all the way until I was 21. I was prescribed antipsychotic medications, and the mechanism of action is specifically to, at the very least, boost serotonin activity. The main mechanism of action, because it was Seroquel, was inhibiting cortisol, inhibiting dopamine, and neuroepinephrine, and inhibiting the receptor sites of dopamine. And so basically what would happen is I had no dopamine. So I know what it feels like to have no dopamine. I know what it feels like to have an excess of serotonin. Okay? At the extreme end, like, because at the time I was on like 1,600 milligrams of Seroquel, and then an additional 400 milligrams in the morning, I would be sleepy all the time. And I would have long periods of time, about a day at a time, where I would literally just sleep. 24 to 48 hours, I would just sleep. And that's because my body wasn't able to produce dopamine or cortisol, which is what wakes you up and what inhibits serotonin. Too much serotonin will make you sleep all the time, and it promotes irregular sleeping patterns. And that's the most extreme. Okay, so serotonin, melatonin, and all of its metabolites are responsible for putting you to sleep. So that's that fatigue feeling that comes along with stimulant withdrawals and high amounts of serotonin promoting substances. That is horrible. Zombie-like feelings. Your thoughts are just super slow. You're stuttering. You can't formulate your thoughts effectively. This is serotonin. Okay, strong amounts of it, and that's at the extreme end. Now at the just overproduction of serotonin in a moderate sense is going to create more feelings of connectiveness with other people, but also feelings of dwelling, okay? Slight feelings of depression and nostalgic tendencies. This is something that doesn't seem to be talked about very often, but I think it's because people just don't recognize it as a neurotransmitter issue. But it's kind of funny when you take antidepressants and these other kind of psychologically active drugs for a period of time. You should be able to connect the dots unless you're just completely oblivious to how you feel and how things affect you, which most people are. Crazy enough, it blows my mind. But also, if you experiment with herbs and supplements, you should also, nootropics, biohackers, these people should be aware of even the most subtle symptoms. And when it comes to serotonin overdose, nostalgic tendencies, dwelling on memories, feeling sympathetic and sentimental, and a lot more emotional. The deep, warm sensations and feelings in your solar plexus, heartfelt warmth and whatnot. This is serotonin, okay? And if you look at a lot of the symptoms and the things that are written about dopamine-driven individuals, people that are supposedly high dopamine individuals, right? Which anyone can be high dopamine or high serotonin, okay? It just depends on what you're taking, what you're eating, how you're conditioning yourself, okay? You could change your neurochemistry at will. But they say high dopamine individuals, they're less likely to care about other people, and they're more logical, on the borderline of being a sociopath, etc. They care more about achievements and money and stuff rather than emotions and happiness, and they tend to be more on the logical side and less on the emotional side. Now, when I say logical, I just mean living your life according to rational thought and considering logic and rational thinking more so than emotion and spiritual purposes, okay? So, for example, the serotonin, the high serotonin individual is more likely to follow his intuition, so to speak, or more likely to stay with his girlfriend because he's in love, or because his spirit just tells him to, or something more like on the dreamy end of the spectrum. This is because serotonin is responsible for those heartfelt, feeling type things, dwelling, nostalgia, these things. Whereas a high dopamine individual would stay with his girlfriend because, she treats me right, she benefits my life, she supports me, we get along very well together, logical reasons, right? But the minute that the relationship starts to show red flags, let's say the woman is physically abusive or something, or she's just a big burden on the person's life, she's threatening the guy with a knife or something, you see a lot of people who stay with that person anyway. And a high dopamine individual would not be able to tolerate that, because the higher your dopamine, the higher your stress levels, the higher your tendency to react on stress, and the more likely you are to think rationally and act on rational thought. Whereas you see a lot of people who are just in a apathetic, dreamy-like state, and they just have too much memories and nostalgia that they're holding on to let go. Because if they let go of that person, in their heads, they're letting go of the nostalgia. Because with high serotonin, and I'm not saying everyone's going to be like this, but this is the general theme of these neurotransmitters. In the high serotonin person's mind, their emotions are very real to them. Nostalgia is still happening. It's like alive. Whereas higher dopamine, a lot of times you can't even register you can't even resonate with these feelings. You can't even begin to start to dwell or feel nostalgic. You're more anxious and more excited and more driven towards the future and productivity, whereas serotonin seems to be more in the moment, but also in the past. Okay, and maybe towards the future, but in an emotional sense, like, oh, like, I can't wait to, I love you, and, can't wait to have a family with you. A lot of romantic, sentimental feelings. And so these are just some ideas surrounding serotonin, higher serotonin levels and overdose, etc., unbalanced serotonin. And now I'm not saying that love is bad, obviously. That's retarded. I mean, I'm a rather loving person. And right now, the whole reason I'm making this video is because because I'm coming off of higher amounts of caffeine, about 450 milligrams of caffeine, isolated caffeine that I would usually use for my workouts, pre-workouts. And now I'm off of that after like 3 days. And whenever I come off of these higher doses of caffeine, I always feel kind of more tendencies towards nostalgia and sentimentalness, and it's more familiar and happier of a feeling being on caffeine, I suppose, but it's all a matter of neurotransmitters. So if you are feeling these serotonin high type feelings, overdose serotonin, first of all, just recognize it's neurotransmitters, okay? A lot of people, they just are so far on that high serotonin end, and they've been that way for so long, they think that it's normal to be this way. But in reality, it's much more of an imbalance, and really can harm you in a way. It can be dangerous to your progress and happiness, okay? And so acknowledge that that's what's going on, and look at maybe reasons as to why you might feel that way if it's unfamiliar. And the best way to counteract this whole serotonin imbalance, first of all, is if you're on drugs, obviously, that agonize or raise or boost serotonin or activity of serotonin receptors, etc. Any herbs that could possibly do that as well, or high sugar diets also, lower protein diets, etc. Maybe you should think about lowering your dosage of these things, or limiting them, or coming off of them altogether. Of course, slowly and safely, and with the help of a licensed professional, obviously, as well. And then maybe start to think about dopamine raising substances, herbs, and supplements, or even diets that can promote dopamine balance. So how can you balance this out? What would I do? Well, for me, L-tyrosine, obviously, about 1 gram in the morning on an empty stomach. This is a direct precursor to dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline, and thyroid hormone, etc. And so if I feel like I have too much serotonin, all I gotta do is start taking tyrosine, and after a few days I'll feel better. Another thing you can do is take mucuna prurens. This is another amazing herb. It's actually velvet bean. It's a bean. And it promotes balance of the dopamine receptors in your brain. Really good for motivation. And of course, when you have high serotonin, you're going to feel low motivation. But higher dopamine is higher motivation. So mucuna prurens is good. Lower your carbs and raise your protein and fat. Because higher protein diets actually, and low carb diets, first of all, because higher carbohydrates promote the synthesis of serotonin. So if you lower your carbs and raise your protein, higher protein, lower carb actually promotes the synthesis of dopamine. This can really help. And then only eat carbs before bed. You always hear about how bad that is and promotes weight gain, yada yada. That's complete bullshit. And the truth is, the main benefit you'll get, the main thing about eating carbs before bed is that it will help you fall asleep, because carbohydrates are very important for serotonin and melatonin synthesis, and without these carbs around that time, you're not going to feel tired. But if you eat them higher and higher amounts throughout the day, you will feel more tired. And If you've ever been on a low carb diet, and I mean low carb, okay, or just, super moderate, you'll notice that when you lower your carbohydrates, after a couple days of your body getting used to it, you feel a lot more energetic and less likely to feel tired and crash throughout the day, especially if you are low on sleep. Okay? So, those are the best ideas I could recommend for promoting dopamine. Another thing that you could do is instead of consuming, well, obviously coffee is really going to stimulate that, but if you're feeling higher serotonin, you probably don't drink coffee. It would be better for you to drink black tea and yerba mate anyway. Yerba mate and Gousya, Gousya, something of that nature. Those are very, very good plants, very good teas for promoting dopamine synthesis and balancing out your neurochemistry. Some high quality Japanese green tea would be a great idea as well. And I love black tea, and I feel like this is another amazing tea you can drink to promote dopamine synthesis. High quality loose leaf is the best. Refer to my high quality tea video so you can figure out which teas, how to find a higher quality tea. Alright, so hopefully you've enjoyed this discussion, and hopefully it's made sense. Leave your questions and comments down below, and I will talk to you soon.